Take a seat.
This one.
Hi. Hey, everybody. Supply Side West, great to see you. Great to see you. Hope you all are having a great show. I'm Duffy Hayes with Informa Markets and the Supply Side team, and I'd like to start today's session with a question. Did you know that there's a segment of our industry with mandatory product listing and compulsory safety substantiation? Of course, I'm talking about cosmetics, and we've got the ongoing rollout of the MOCRA regulatory program, That's what we're going to dive headlong into today. Thanks for joining us. To do that, we have two fantastic presenters in the space, which is where we're going to start. I want to introduce our first presenter. It's Mark Moulin. He's Director of Clinical Services at KGK Science. Not only is KGK a consultancy that's deeply involved in the cosmetics category, but Mark is someone we can all really learn a lot from. I'm sure you'll all agree. Mark, I'll turn it over to you now. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Sorry, Duffy, is this the...
That's your clicker, yeah.
Clicker? Just green button?
Green button, yeah.
Green button, terrific. Okay, good afternoon. As Duffy said, my name is Mark Moulin, Director of Clinical Services at KGK Science, contract research organization located in London, Ontario, specializing in clinical research and regulatory expertise for the nutraceutical industry. But I'm here today to talk about meeting the safety compliance burden under the new Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act. I think we're... There we go, back in it. All right, diving in. So if you're in the cosmetics industry, or even if you aren't, you're probably aware by now that the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act was signed into law by President Biden on December 9th, 2022. And this represents the first significant amendment of the FDA&C Act for cosmetics since it was first enacted in 1938. MOCRA implements full authority for GMP regulations for cosmetics, cosmetic facility registration, record keeping requirements, mandatory reporting of serious adverse events, mandatory ingredient and product listings for cosmetics, and perhaps most importantly, safety substantiation. Considering that people use, on average, 6 to 12 cosmetic products a day, MOCRA represents an important step towards greater consumer safety, consumer confidence in retailers, greater compliance by the industry, and greater authority for the FDA to enforce compliance. The major moving pieces of MOCRA are GMPs, the need to have and provide records documentation to the FDA, as well as required safety substantiation. Here's the roadmap for today. We'll aim to provide a brief overview of MOCRA and the timelines for compliance when FDA expects to release draft and final rules. We'll then briefly go into adverse event reporting, GMPs, testing and record keeping, and follow up with safety substantiation. Finally, we'll talk about best practices and final conclusions and takeaways from today's presentation. This slide highlights key terminology under MOCRA, some very technical language, and you may ask what constitutes safety substantiation. Now, you might know what it means for clinical trials in making structure function claims. And with safety substantiation cosmetics, it's actually the same thing. It constitutes that for all tests, studies, research, analyses, and other evidence that is considered among experts, sufficient to support with certainty that a cosmetic product is safe. So nothing new here. And the safety standard under MOCRA is aligned with conventional foods and dietary supplements. Safe means not injurious to users under the conditions of use prescribed in the labeling thereof, or under such conditions of use that are customary or usual. Now, SOPs should delineate the responsible person at a company who is in charge of maintaining the collective repository of evidence intended to support, with reasonable certainty, the safety of cosmetic ingredients and the finished product. The responsible party is the manufacturer, the packer or distributor of a cosmetic product whose names appears on the label of said cosmetic. But the designated person should be named in an SOP by the company. And just like GMP inspections for dietary supplements, the responsible party who handles record keeping is the person who will be interfacing with the FDA during inspections. Here's the FDA's official cosmetic roadmap. So as I mentioned, we start with the enactment of MOCRA on December 29th, 2022. We had an extended deadline on November 8th, 2023 for enforcement, as well as FDA's Cosmetic Direct, which is a portal where companies can go to register their ingredients and their finished products. The deadlines for MOCA enforcement on safety substantiation, adverse event reporting, record keeping, and mandatory recall authority were set in December 2023. The proposed rule for allergen labeling and cosmetics was on June 29, 2024, but that date has come and gone at this point. And enforcement was delayed to July 1st, 2024 of this year for cosmetic facility registration and registration with Cosmetic Direct. Then we have the CGMP proposed rule for cosmetics scheduled for the end of this year. The allergen labeling final rule is set for February of next year. And finally, the CGMP finalized rule is set for the end of 2025. All very ambitious deadlines. And as you may have noticed as I went through that, there's a bit of a theme, and that would be government delay. Given that DSHEA required final guidance for NDI notifications in 1994, I'm going to say that again, 1994, and we're still waiting for those guidelines to come out in pieces well into 2025. You can see how long this may take despite the ambition behind it. Let's remember that even the road to hell was also paved with good intentions. I'm going to just briefly touch on adverse event reporting because the next speaker is going to dive more deeply into the topic. But this is a graph of self-reported adverse event symptoms experienced by citizens in the European Union. Now, the European Union has had greater oversight of cosmetic products for a long period of time, so there just may be more data that is available. However, again, Rick will go into that more deeply. But because the cosmetic market is so global, what has been reported elsewhere could very well be what we see reported here in just a few years. Now, I don't think there's anything overly surprising about what's on this graph, except for maybe the more serious events, such as swelling, burns, and difficulty breathing. But what this graph highlights well is the wide range of adverse events that are reported, the potential seriousness of those adverse events, and really the importance of mandatory safety substantiation. Moving on to cosmetic CGMPs, while there has been guidance and FDA has issued warning letters, mostly over contamination and failure to register, there hasn't been either a final rule or a formal inspection program related to cosmetics. This will take time. If we draw a comparison to the dietary supplement CGMP final rule, it was passed in 2008, but it took 2 years to train up investigators. They issued 8 warning letters in their first year, and it started ramping up from 50 inspections annually to 700 inspections annually. There wasn't the first inspection of a foreign company until about 2013. So there will be a ramp-up period. We can expect contaminants and inadequate contaminant testing to be a major issue for FDA, as well as how specifications were set and whether those specifications were met and if there's records of that actually occurring. Those are likely going to be the top 3 issues for the FDA, as these were points of contention for them during the GMP inspections in dietary supplements. It will become imperative for companies to start writing SOPs, who they're designating as the person for record keeping and who will be responsible for managing access to those records. Company education will be critical, and writing SOPs for how one handles voluntary recalls and who makes up that voluntary recall team as well. Evidence one has collected for substantiation, as well as what we've talked about in terms of GMP records, will become critical. There will be lots of growing pains and potential black eyes in the industry, as most likely some very large players will probably be made into examples of by the FDA. With the exception of color additives, prior to MOCA, there was no requirement for FDA approval of cosmetic ingredients of finished products before entering the market. In the past, cosmetic ingredients and products had to be adequately substantiated for safety, but companies had an out. For products that didn't have adequate substantiation, manufacturers were allowed to apply a warning label that said that safety had not been determined. This is no longer an option. They will have to have substantiation for their ingredients, safety exposure, rationale for the level selected, and ultimately what was included in that final product. So MOCA now mandates that you must have safety substantiation for your cosmetic products and removes the option of using that warning label. If you rely on a supplier, you must still have those records. FDA will be inspecting label distributors of cosmetics and contract manufacturers, so they will be asking you for that documentation. It will no longer be enough to say that someone else has it. And while we wait for federal guidance, it won't stop the FDA from asking and making copies of records relating to safety substantiation. And there is no FDA regulation which mandates specific testing to be conducted for safety, so there is no prescriptive or standardized approach at this time. Now, the United States Congress seems to be arguing for reliance on non-animal methods for determining safety, but they're not in charge of those details, and that has been left up to the agency. It may not be what you want to hear, but animal testing is unlikely to go away. It is not banned, and over 90% of current cosmetic ingredients have already been tested for safety using standard animal models that model human skin. Animal testing is probably the gold standard for safety, but FDA is allowing for flexibility with non-animal methods. The only issue is that the FDA says you may not be able to get there using animal methods alone. The burden is yours, and you may find that you need to perform substantiation with animal models. They say testing should be phased out of the industry and avoid animal testing when you can, but at the same time they're encouraging scientifically robust methods to substantiate safety. Both FTC and FDA state you must have scientifically robust methods to support safety, and that often means animal testing. So recognize that Congress is saying one thing to encourage the phasing out of animal testing, but they're not the sole authority on that, and you may realize that animal models are the only way to go. It's not a cruelty-free claim argument. It's really just a statement regarding reality while we wait for FDA to bless certain non-animal methods. Cosmetic safety dossiers should include risk assessments to appropriately assess a consumer's risk to a cosmetic product and its ingredients. Risk assessments identify any ingredient hazards while estimating exposure to determine safety of their cosmetic product. The quote on the bottom of this slide comes directly from the FDA webpage, and it states that after considering available alternatives, companies may determine that animal testing is necessary to assure the safety of their product or ingredient. Moving on from the previous slide, we have hazard assessment. This considers both local and systemic toxicity concerns. And there's actually a few excellent resources available, including the Cosmetic Ingredient Review, the European Food Safety Authority, and the Scientific Committee for Consumer Safety Opinions, or the SCCS. These organizations provide scientific opinions and conclusions on the safety of ingredients for human use in either cosmetics or food. And the FDA has previously opined that these resources are taken into consideration when they evaluate cosmetic safety, making the CIR an excellent resource for this assessment. There's also databases like ECHA, the US EPA CompTox database, which would compile identity and hazard information as well. As mentioned earlier, so animal testing is not mandated under MOCRA, but in vivo animal testing is certainly the gold standard with the FDA and best practices. There's also historical animal data, in silico testing, benchmark dose modeling, and or read-across approaches, which all are viable options for hazard assessment. If there are significant gaps in scientific evidence, animal toxicological testing may be necessary to demonstrate the safety of the finished product, such as in vitro genotoxicity studies, subchronic, chronic, or other animal models. Safety substantiation may also require you to investigate chemical or physical characteristics, such as solubility. Exposure-based approaches are used to consider the cumulative and relevant exposure to a finished product and its ingredients. Exposure assessments take into account the type of the product, the route of exposure, how often a consumer will be expected to use that product based on instructions of use, as well as product formulations, not only considering the ingredient, but their actual individual concentrations at which they are present. The SCCS published notes of guidance for the safety evaluation of cosmetic products. The guidance explains the scientific approach one can take in the assessment of safety and provides average daily exposure levels for cosmetics across 35 different categories. And in 2011, the US EPA published a handbook providing information on various human physiological and behavioral factors that can be used to assist in the assessment of exposure. It estimates data on the quantity of the product used, the frequency of use, the duration of use, and it also provides factors on dermal exposure which can be used in the risk assessment. Of course, for cosmetics, the dermal route of exposure is often the most critical one. The systemic exposure dose, or SED, is the amount of a substance that is estimated to enter the bloodstream upon dermal exposure. SED calculations use a known dermal absorption rate, typically taken from published literature, the skin surface area expected to be exposed, and the average frequency of use. Values that can be obtained from resources such as the EPA or the SCCS notes of guidance. And when assessing the risk of cosmetics via dermal exposure, the margin of safety calculation, or the MOS, is a useful tool. In practice, oral route studies are used in this calculation to consider systemic toxicity, and the MOS is the ratio between the expected dosage of exposure and a dose that was determined to have no adverse risk from the hazard assessment. Therefore, all available ingredient and exposure data is considered in the final safety assessment. It combines both the hazard and exposure evaluations to assess one's risk, and varies significantly based on the type of data that is collected to arrive at a final conclusion. So you may have greater confidence in animal testing or use of historical animal data, but there are animal-free methods such as QSAR or ToxTree that can estimate safety as well. Traditional risk assessments follow the pathway on the left, which is now highlighted, and the idea is to establish a definitive no observed adverse effect level or lowest observed adverse effect level, and these are used in risk assessment as a point of departure, or POD. The benchmark dose is an alternative approach used by the WHO and EFSA for estimating point of departure, and PODs are often then used to derive a toxicological reference dose, or RFD. And the RFD is the dose which estimates daily exposure that occurs without an appreciable risk of adverse events over a particular lifetime. Meanwhile, animal-free testing methods utilize computational tools such as quantitative structure-activity relationship, or QSAR modeling, or the threshold of toxicological concern, known as the TTC approach. QSAR looks to understand relationships between molecular structures or functional groups of similar compounds to predict the probability of toxicity of an ingredient. It makes assumptions and is not based on any animal data, other than what can be extrapolated on safety from known compounds with similar functional groups. It essentially provides a structurally known analogs to your compounds, and then assigns a classification number from 1 to 5, depending on whether the ingredient has any alerts for carcinogenicity or mutagenicity to arrive at a safety conclusion. Finally, the threshold of toxicological concern, or TTC approach, considers the structural nature of the ingredient to group it into one of 3 structural classes. Each class is assigned a threshold value that can be compared to the SED to arrive at a safety conclusion. Generally, alternative methods to animal testing are used when there are gaps in databases that lack experimental data. They prove to be important tools in the risk assessment and for the substantiation of safety in the absence of any other data. Ultimately, the decision on which approach is used is on a case-by-case basis based on the ingredient, the product, but also the company and the level of regulatory risk that you may or may not want to take. Finally, with product testing, we have identity testing, heavy metal testing, stability testing, microbiological, as well as clinical testing using patch tests are also important determinants of safety at the product level. These will probably be addressed in future CGMP cosmetic final rule, and having records documentation for these are all critical towards substantiating your safety and the measures your company has in place. And patch testing can be conducted to assess the potential skin irritation or allergic reaction in human volunteers under controlled conditions, and this is akin to tolerability testing of your product to know how it impacts consumers. At this point in the presentation, we have covered all these topics to a greater or lesser degree. Record keeping is going to be an eye-opener based on the freedom of which the FDA has during inspections to collect labels and all accompanying safety information and GMP data related to the manufacturing of the product. FDA now has subpoena power for all records during inspections. not to overwhelm you, but they can ask for safety substantiation, scientific lit reviews, information on the sourcing of your ingredients, how you chose your supplier, how you qualified your supplier, evidence of one's specifications, did you meet those specifications, who makes up your recall team, how do you handle recalls, just to name a few. It really is top to bottom. They can ask for anything they want, and you are obliged to provide it to them. So record keeping in conjunction with GMP is going to be a virtual sandbox for the agency to compel compliance. If you need help with GMPs, identity testing, knowing how to substantiate safety, find an expert. Don't just wing it. We need to really understand that the Wild West of cosmetics is coming to an end, and you must have systems and SOPs in place as to how your company will be following these new guidelines. And remember that GMP problems don't necessarily mean you have a problem. It actually might just be that there's something in a technical record that adulterates your product. It's not just a misbranding, it is a technical adulteration of your product. It is the same with safety substantiation. The FDA will look to poke holes in your record keeping to arrive at a misbranding on your label or for technical adulterations. We often think of the FDA as this benevolent organization that is there to assist you. They are not there to assist you, unfortunately. They are there to issue warning letters to you and your peers and to remove adulterated products from the market that are not falling under compliance. With that, thank you, attendees, Supply Side West, and session organizers. If you have any questions, you can come find us at, either contact us at KJK Science, or for any immediate questions, I strongly encourage you to come talk to us at our booth, which is actually number 7249, not number 6971. So just a slight change there, but we're at booth 7249. Our regulatory team, which is actually led by Dr. Corey Hilmas, formerly of the FDA, will love to talk all things cosmetics and MOCRA. But thank you very much for your time.
Mark, thank you. Appreciate it. Hey, before you sit down, I got a quick follow-up question for you here. Obviously, other segments of the dietary supplement industry are looking at cosmetics and maybe seeing their future here with MOCRA. Do you see that same, or how are other segments of our industry looking at cosmetics, do you think?
I think they're looking at it with open eyes. I mean, for again, the term being the Wild West, and it's important that that is coming to an end. And again, Rick is going to dive into further reason why that's really important.
Yeah.
But they should be looking at it and expecting that if something similar isn't here now, you should fully expect it to be in the future, and maybe start to prepare for that, because I spoke with someone yesterday who works in the cosmetic industry. They have products, and I said, "Oh, so what do you think of MOCRA?" And she didn't know what I was talking about. So that in itself is a bit of a problem. It's people need to pay attention. They need to take notice. And if you're in another industry that might feel a little bit more like the Wild West, think about how you need to react when that is no longer the case.
Excellent. Mark, how about a hand for Mark? Thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate it. Okay, our next presenter is going to take a hard look at adverse event reporting. Mark briefly mentioned that. To be honest, we have probably the source of the subject today. Rick Kingston is co-founder of Safety Call. It's a 24/7 adverse event call center. He's a clinical toxicologist, professor of pharmacology at the University of Minnesota, and he's also an adjunct professor at the National Center for Natural Product Research at the University of Mississippi. I'm sure you're all familiar with that group. Rick, awesome to have you here. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think you'll get the... Well, first I'd like to thank Informa and Duffy for putting this session together.
Got it.
I always find that when I come to this meeting, he's always got something interesting to present to the group, and so I'm hoping that you find that to be the case today. If we take a look at MOCRA, it's been in effect, essentially since it's been passed. And so we've, at Safety Call, had a number of clients that have come on board that wanted us to handle their adverse events. And we have other companies that are already in the dietary supplement market that already have cosmetics that they have not really integrated into their adverse event system for reporting to the FDA. And so I wanted to get into the weeds a little bit in terms of some of the things that you should be thinking about when you're putting your systems in place, and some of the nuances. And also, I'll end on what happens to that data once it's in the databases that the FDA maintains. So we talked about, Mark mentioned that you've got these buckets of things that you're going to need to be involved in. You've obviously got facility registration, you've got product and ingredient listing, which is one of the big things that came out of this legislation. And if you think about it, they kind of went ahead of what's happening in the dietary supplement area because they don't have that requirement. But when Congress developed this particular legislation, they specifically wanted to make sure that companies were registering all of their products to make it easier for them to monitor the safety once it's in the marketplace and to be able to accurately identify products that are suspected to have unreasonable or unacceptable safety profile for a variety of reasons. And then you have the cosmetic labeling, which is another part of this, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then the two areas that I just want to spend a little bit more time with is the safety substantiation, because adverse events actually play into that and what the expectations of the FDA might be in terms of how you're monitoring that and how it impacts the safety that you have documented in your product dossier for that particular product. And then the adverse event reporting and record keeping, the documentation, the assessment, and the reporting. I'm going to spend a lot of time, or most of the time, on that aspect because it's got a lot of implications for companies that oftentimes they don't think about. First of all, excuse me. First of all, on the safety substantiation side, they say that a responsible person for a cosmetic product shall ensure and maintain records supporting that there is adequate substantiation of safety of each cosmetic product. And then they go down and talk about what they mean by adequate substantiation of safety. And in this case, they say the term adequate substantiation of safety means tests or studies, research, analysis, or other evidence or information that is considered among experts qualified by scientific training and experience to evaluate the safety of cosmetic products and their ingredients sufficient to support a reasonable certainty that a cosmetic product is safe. So that if there's some issue that FDA identifies, they may come to you and say, okay, I want to see your full file on substantiation. And we want to go over it with a fine-tooth comb and try to figure out what's going on in this particular case. They're expecting that you have that information on hand and ready to hand over at a moment's notice, either during an inspection or during some type of an action that the FDA is involved in. The other interesting thing is that they do provide a definition for safe. And I kind of joke sometimes when I talk to people, you ask, what does it mean that your product is safe? You can ask 20 people, and certainly if you ask 20 lawyers, you're going to get 20 different answers. But what happened with the FDA in this area, they define the term safe means that the cosmetic product, including any ingredient thereof, is not injurious to users under the conditions of use prescribed in the labeling thereof, or under such conditions of use that are customary or usual. The next part of it is what I think is really important. They recognize that not all adverse events are created equal. And so the Secretary shall not consider a cosmetic ingredient or cosmetic product injurious to users solely because it can cause minor and transient reactions or minor and transient skin irritations in some users. So that's kind of a big deal. It's very similar to what we saw happen with the EPA-regulated products, which surprisingly have a very similar framework for reporting of adverse events. In the EPA legislation, they specifically excluded effects that involve minor skin irritation with exposure and or respiratory irritation. So that if you have that, those types of situations, they're excluded from even being reported under the 682 reporting guidelines. So I thought it was interesting that they carved that out and made that information available so that, if you've got a product and somebody uses it and they complain that, it's an exfoliative product that they use on their face and they had a little minor irritation, that's not considered by the FDA to be a serious situation. But what if it goes on for 3 months? That's a whole different scenario. So there's a time limit on that. Notice that they talk about transient. So if it's short-lived, it's not a big deal. But if it's an ongoing problem that the consumer is reporting, it can then go up to a higher step to be considered a serious adverse event that has to be reported. The other thing that I find really interesting with this is that this is the first time that I've seen fragrances and flavor ingredients carved out specifically in this type of legislation. And they say here, if the Secretary has reasonable grounds to believe that an ingredient or combination of ingredients in a fragrance or flavor has caused or contributed to a serious adverse event, notice that there's not an S on the back of that, required to be reported under this section, the Secretary may request in writing a list of such ingredients or categories of ingredients in the specific fragrances or flavors in the cosmetic product from the responsible person. Responsible person shall ensure that the requested information is submitted to the Secretary within 30 days of such a request. So I'm going to give you an example. We just had a situation in the dietary supplement market where the FDA has been scrutinized a particular ingredient, specifically the dose of this ingredient that's being used in a very, very popular, as a popular ingredient in dietary supplements. And they decided to ask all the manufacturers that have this ingredient being offered at this particular dosage to provide substantiation of the safety and all the information that they have to support it. And so they also added that they wanted all the adverse event data analyzed as part of this data call-in, if you will. So we have a number of companies that have this particular ingredient. And I had a chance to visit with the senior FDA officer that's in charge of this. And I said, look, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge to pull all this together in like 20 days. And she said to me, she says, what do you mean? You should already have all the substantiation. All you have to do is just package it up and send it to us. I said, you don't understand. If you want to have all the adverse event information, tabulated, analyzed, and as it pertains to this particular issue, you're going to need more than 20 days. And then she said, oh, well, I guess you're right. Then we can offer an extension in that particular case. But the thing that I found so interesting, the first thing out of her mouth was, just take your substantiation and send it in. You're supposed to already have this. That's the expectation, that it's not something that you develop after the fact. It's something that you actually have already done. As Mark mentioned, all the different things that you have to go through to demonstrate that that ingredient or that product is safe under normal circumstances of use. So you have to think about what the FDA can do and what their expectations are and what they may be asking you to do on the moment's notice. So then you've got the AE reporting and the record keeping. You have to report to the FDA any serious adverse event within 15 business days after receiving information concerning such an event. And then you have to maintain the records. And you have essentially 6 years for the mainstream companies that are large enough, but for smaller businesses, it's 3 years. But that means that you have to have that information available again, and you go back in some circumstances to information that you collected, and you may have to provide that as well. So it's important to make sure that your SOPs involve maintaining those records the way that they can be easily accessed. So then we talk about the definitions. This is where it gets a little bit dicey. According to MOCR legislation, the term adverse event means any health-related event associated with the use of a cosmetic product that is adverse. That's a pretty broad definition. So you can imagine that there's a lot of things that end up getting reported, and you have to ferret out which ones actually fall into that category and how they fall into the category and how they're impacting consumers. The other thing is there's a substantial difference in the way that they actually analyze the requirements for reportability. So if you look at the typical FDA serious adverse event definitions, it's got the most common things that you think about. It's going to be death, a life-threatening experience, inpatient hospitalization, a persistent or significant disability or incapacity, a congenital anomaly or birth defect, or an incident that requires, based on reasonable medical judgment, a medical or surgical intervention to prevent an outcome described above. And then there's a classification they have for other serious important medical events that's kind of a catch-all category that we sometimes use depending on the type of event that's being reported. But MOCR, they changed the battlefield here. If you look at the bottom section, they added for a serious adverse event an infection or significant disfigurement, including serious and persistent rashes, second or third degree burns, significant hair loss, or persistent or significant alteration of appearance other than is noted under the conditions of use that are customary and usual. Then they go on to say, or requires, based on reasonable medical judgment, a medical surgical intervention to prevent an outcome described in A above. So they're expecting that you have that kind of expertise. And a lot of companies already have medical people within their ranks and their science groups. But FDA says if you don't have it, you can certainly go outside and obtain that kind of support. But I think it's really important to point out some of the things that they considered. So first of all, how do you know it's an infection? Consumer X calls up, and I can tell you we deal with this every day. They go, you know what, I used your product on my arm and it's now infected. And you say, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about it. You know, they have all types of, ways that they describe it, and you ask them what kind of treatment, and say, well, I got this hydrocortisone. They told me to use hydrocortisone, my doctor did. Well, if they're using hydrocortisone, it's not an infection. It's usually more an allergic type of reaction. That's what you use steroids for. That would suggest that we're dealing more likely with potentially an infection. But the other thing for our group, since they haven't provided guidance yet, our medical group got together and decided that we needed to be able to serve our clients and have a defensible position on it, so we came up with our own definition, which includes, in part, that they have to be seen by a clinician and actually being diagnosed as having an infection, which then you get a more likely explanation as to whether or not it might fall into that category for being a serious adverse event. So, if you just leave it as infection, there's just so much noise out there that it needs to have more clarity, so it's important for companies to be able to respond to that. The other thing I thought was interesting, remember I mentioned that persistent rashes. You can have a mild rash that's transient, like I mentioned before, and that's not a reportable event. But if it goes on for weeks or maybe months, it puts it into a whole different category. And the last one I was just going to mention is significant hair loss. That's something we've dealt with. A number of our clients have had hair care products. They end up having circumstances where there's complaints of hair loss. And in some cases, it's just hair breakage. It's not loss. So in other words, you don't have the root shaft essentially being damaged so that they don't actually generate hair. So being able to differentiate that, know the types of questions to ask of that consumer so that you have a defensible position on it is going to be important. So those are some things that just keep in the back of your mind. The other thing that I think is important about this is that when you have, if say you're a dietary supplement company and you're not in the cosmetic field yet, you already have a legacy data system that collects adverse event information. They usually don't have it built in to be able to have a difference for different types of products, that whether it's a cosmetic or a dietary supplement. So a lot of times, companies are really concerned that they have to update their legacy software to be able to include this and evaluate a cosmetic product differently than they would for a dietary supplement, for example. I know that was one of the things that was a big change for us to actually modify our information system so that we could accommodate both categories of reports. And so I think some companies are going to find that will be a little bit daunting. Then the other thing, the contact information. FDA is expecting that you have minimum pieces of information to help determine if it's a reportable event. And it says a responsible person shall receive reports of adverse events through the domestic address, domestic telephone number, or electronic contact information, including on the label, in accordance with Section 609A. And I've heard some people say, well, yeah, we just have all those things go into an email box, and then that's our adverse event system. That's not going to cut it with the FDA if you end up with a 483 because you actually did not follow through with the key factors that are required for not only documenting the adverse events, but also determining which ones have to be reported. So we're thinking about it, you think adverse event compliance is more than just contact information for who's reporting something. It's a prescribed process for receiving, investigating, which is an expectation as well, documenting, assessing, and ultimately submitting to the FDA. So it's a prescriptive process and they spell out what they expect. So the other thing about AA reporting compliance versus basic bookkeeping, the compliance side of it, and this really is, I'm probably speaking to the friendlies here, you probably already have some of this already covered in terms of the things that you do under product stewardship, that you want to know if something's happening with your product that might recall or might suggest that there could be an adulteration issue, an out of specification issue. It could be something happening to the product once it's in the hands of consumers. All those different types of things could happen. So you have to make sure that you're prepared to collect that kind of information to sort that out. So you have to receive the report, investigate the incidents, and apply reasonable medical judgment for reportability, because they're going to go through your records. That's one of the first things that happens in inspections. They go right to your record keep and say, I want to see your list and your logs of all your adverse events, or I want to be able to access it, and we want to pull up information on it. They're going to ask you to defend everything that you do in terms of how you document it and whether or not you report it. Then you have to document the report and your findings, what you think is going on in that case, assess for internal and external stakeholders. A lot of times I talk to companies that are saying, well, why do I really need to do this? Because your stakeholders are likely to hold your feet to the fire, especially if you, say for instance, you have a private equity group that owns the company and the organization. They don't want to have any regulatory issues. So I don't want to be in a situation where they're not collecting information that would potentially put the company at risk. And so they're going to expect that you have that kind of product stewardship already a part of your normal operations. And then we also talk, and sometimes the external stakeholders can be shareholders. We've had situations where a company had an adverse event related issue that they weren't reporting, and that the cases looked like they might be serious. And so what ended up happening is that the shareholders actually sued the management of the company, saying that they withheld information that would help them make a better decision on whether or not this was a stock that they should be owning or keeping or selling. So there could be all kinds of stakeholders that are wanting to look at this data. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the nuances of other people that are looking at this data that you need to be thinking about. So then lastly, submitting through the available portals and maintaining your records. So just think about it kind of big picture. You're collecting a lot of this data, and there is an expectation by FDA and by Congress actually that FDA is going to use it for something. The other thing is that this data is going to be accessible to the general public, and they can mine this data. They can do that right now within the CARES system, but what's also interesting is that they're moving from the CARES system to the FAIR system, which is more on the drug side and CEDAR rather than CIFSAN, and certainly with the reorganization at FDA, there's going to be some separation of church and state in some of these particular areas. So that's something to keep in mind. Other people are going to be looking at your data. They're going to be holding your feet to the fire, and especially if they see something that's going on, they're going to want to have some answers. I've got a situation right now with this young reporter from New Zealand that's attacking a particular product because he looked at the adverse event data on the CARES database and said this demonstrates that this product is hurting people, with serious adverse events. He never read the disclaimers. You're talking about spontaneously reported incident data. It's not causation data. You're looking for associations, and if they meet certain thresholds, then you want to investigate those to see if they actually represent something that you need to be concerned about. So it's hard sometimes talking to some of these investigative reporters that have no clue. They've never read the legislation. They never read the disclaimers. They just assume that this is prima facie support that this product caused the adverse event. FDA specifically says there's no requirement that you make a causal association, and that data is not used for that purpose. It's used for signal detection. But there's going to be other people that use and access your data and may come up with a different solution. So you need to be prepared to respond to those types of inquiries. Then also, there's been a couple of updates from FDA regarding 2 new submission options for adverse events. Some of you, if you have cosmetics, you're probably already on top of this. You got option A, which is via the database-to-database transmission, the electronic submission gateway. And then FDA adverse event reporting system, the FAIRS database, as I mentioned, they're using FAIRS, not CIFSAN. And then electronic submissions. Then option B, just via the safety portal that they have in place. They really want to have electronic communications as it relates to adverse events. And then lastly, emphasis on FDA's expectations regarding use of reasonable medical judgment when assessing AEs for reportability. That's one thing I think has really been helpful for our clients, because we have a whole medical group that actually evaluates these, categorizes them, and we can defend the definitions that we use and whether or not we determine that it's actually something that needs to be reported. So those are kind of some of the big picture items. I'll open it up for questions or see what we want to do.
Thank you. Great stuff, Rick. Appreciate it. I'll ask you a similar question that I asked Mark here. How are sort of other categories of dietary supplements looking at cosmetics from your perspective? Are they also wary of what's going on, or are they not paying attention, or what's your take?
Well, I think everyone was thinking that there was going to be passage of this law when it first went into effect.
Yeah.
But everybody got taken by surprise when they actually passed it. They go, what? This actually came about? And the short timelines, they required, adverse event reporting from the outset, in January of last year. And so a lot of companies are, scrambling to make sure that they're meeting all their obligations. And there's some companies that literally have no clue that they even have the requirement.
Right.
Those are the ones that I'm most concerned about, because they're the ones that are subject to audits and 483s for not having the system in place in the first place, but not reporting the adverse events. Because sure. FDA, when they get reports, especially for serious ones, there's a box on the form that says, have you contacted the manufacturer? And if they say yes, and the FDA goes and looks for that report and it's not there, you're potentially, opening yourself up to having, an unnecessary urgent audit, associated with your particular product. So it's kind of an issue that companies have to deal with.
There's a lot happening at FDA, a lot of changes and a lot of structural changes. How are they handling this new regulatory scheme? And how's the rollout been, I guess?
Well, well, they admit readily that this is a challenge for them.
Yeah.
You know, this is sweeping regulation change for cosmetics. They just have never had anything quite this significant. And, you know, the companies are doing the best that they can to, first of all, what do we have to do if we either have cosmetics or we want to bring cosmetics into our organization?
Right.
They need to be thinking about how to integrate that with their existing systems of surveillance for their dietary supplements, for example.
Awesome.
But FDA will tell you, that's why you haven't seen the guides document for you know, infection and all these other types of things. That may not even come out until early first quarter of 2025.
Okay.
So there you go.
We'll look for that soon. Thank you guys, Mark, Rick. I'm going to excuse you guys. Thank you so much for the great information. Round of applause for our presenters here. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. So we obviously learned a lot about the program itself, but how are these regulations truly affecting brands? For that, I'm going to invite someone to the stage now from a brand to dive deeper into that subject. I'm going to bring Auclair Walters to the stage. He's CEO of Poofy Organics. That's a company at the forefront of natural body and skincare products. Auclair, great to have you. Nice to see you.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So a lot of information there.
Yes, it is. It's a lot to digest.
Yeah. We'll get to how your company is handling MOCRA and the new regulations, but I want you to maybe start by just giving us your brand story and letting people know a little bit about your company and how you got here.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm with Poofy Organics. We are located in East Rutherford, New Jersey, just outside of New York City. And we are, I must say, we're one of the best kept secrets in this country, seriously. We manufacture just a host of products from home, bath, body, beauty, wellness. We have close to 500 different products. We have about 135 USDA certified organic products. And it's one of our, I think, just our claim to fame. We really support an audience who really take their products seriously. They are label readers. They look for, and I must say, while we offer a lot of products, there's something we offer most important. We like to call it the Poofy peace of mind. When a customer or consumer buys our product, what they're truly shopping is the peace of mind, the comfort that when you buy a Poofy products, it's gone through the rigorous USDA certification process. It truly has natural, organic, pure ingredients. That is priceless. And I think we're in a time where the average consumer is so much more knowledgeable and has so much more information at their fingertips that they're demanding clean products. And I think everyone deserves access to clean products at an affordable price. And that's who we are. And what's really important about it, we take what we do as more than just offering products, Duffy. It's really about servicing our customers. And our company started 17 years ago out of a need. The founder, her mom was going through cancer treatment. And she was determined to find products that were toxin-free, that she could offer her mom. And what she found was there really wasn't I'm going to say a one-stop shop, if you will. She had to go many different places to find singular products. So she decided to create her own. So out of a family necessity, grew a brand with a remarkable story. What we do is, I think it's so priceless because many customers that we have similar stories. Yeah. And so they have a need and a necessity to find products that offer them clean, toxin-free, high quality, but affordable products, and that's who we are.
Yeah, your founder was sort of ahead of the curve here.
Absolutely.
It seems like the cosmetics market, especially the ones with the companies that we deal with, have sort of caught up to that brand message, don't you think?
They're moving in that direction. Actually, to your point, Duffy, being here, you see that. Yeah. I'm amazed at how many companies here as suppliers are offering, organic certified, USDA certified organic ingredients and natural ingredients. Well, that's obvious because the consumers are demanding it. And we've been doing it for over 17 years. So that's who we are. That's the space we play in, and we're thrilled to be I'm going to say, offer solutions to customers that are looking for, for those products.
Fantastic. So this session is about the new regulatory scheme, and so obviously I want to get your take on how MOCRA has impacted your business and maybe your product development. Give us a thumbnail of how the new regulations are playing within your company.
Man, you said quite a bit, and all that is spot on. MOCRA is literally turn us upside down in many ways.
Wow.
In terms of a product development approach, we've had to take, I'm going to say, a long, serious look at how we source ingredients.
Right.
We have to be very careful about, suppliers that make sure we, as the companies, now have a higher threshold of accountability for the suppliers. So we have to ensure that, one, they are compliant. We have to ensure that they are having the right disclosures, that their labels, for example, have the full list of ingredients, all the things you talked about earlier. So there's a tremendous burden on us now to make sure we're doing our due diligence, to canvass carefully, and it's changed some things for us. We've actually had to look for some different suppliers, and in fact, one of the reasons I'm here is to take advantage of the opportunity to look at alternate sources of some of our ingredients. Because of the number of products we offer, we use quite a lot of ingredients, and to be able to find suppliers that offer products that meet those MOCRA regulatory requirements and check those boxes, that's a lot of headaches for companies like myself.
Yeah, I imagine.
Especially when you're a smaller company.
Right.
It's quite a burden, but we're managing.
Okay. Has it affected your formulation at all at this point? And that's got to be a challenge as well.
Great question. Well, I'm going to say it's made us be more risk aware.
Yeah.
And what that means for me is we've had to think twice about the ingredients we use. So one of the things you alluded to, there's one of the MOCRA requirements is if an ingredient you use is an allergen, like we make a lot of home bath body products that uses extracts and organic fragrances, but some fragrances can be an allergen.
Yeah.
So there's a requirement to have full disclosure, and so we have to make sure that if there's certain ingredients that we think that could be an allergen, we now think twice about it. For example, there was a product we had last year that included a particular seed oil. This year, we reformulated it without that seed oil.
Yeah.
Because it's known to be an allergen to some people, so it's made us think twice.
Yeah.
About our formulations.
You have to play it a little safer, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
What about like testing? Do you do additional testing now on your products? Is that part of the deal too?
It's twofold. One of our I'm going to say one of the things that works very well for our company is we are USDA certified. So one of the benefits for us is some of the requirements of MOCRA, we could check them because with our certification process with USDA, which is pretty rigid, we've had to meet those requirements before.
Okay.
So in some instances, we've had to make some more steps and make some changes outside of the realm of organic certifications to be compliant with MOCRA. Absolutely.
What, just generally speaking, what do you think about this focus just on cosmetics? I mean, obviously the whole dietary supplement industry is looking at this. I mean, you guys are really under the microscope.
I mean, I think we're the guinea pigs for all intents and purposes.
I didn't want to say that.
And I must say, watch out, because if it happens to us, wink, wink, I mean, it's going to happen to us, right? And I get it.
Yeah.
I understand. When I look at our customers and, if you buy a cosmetic product, you're placing it on your skin. We like to say at Poofy Organics, it's not just important what you put in your body.
Yeah.
It's critical what you put on your body. Your largest organ is your skin. So we understand the necessity, the urgency, and the importance from a USDA standpoint to ensure that these requirements offer consumer peace of mind and comfort. So I get it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it easy for us, but I understand. But I think, we've adjusted, we are adjusting. It's a process. but I would say watch out to other sectors. I don't think it's going to be a matter of time before what you're seeing here gets parlayed into other areas.
Sure. Okay. I wanted to ask you about labeling. You mentioned that. Has this changed the way you label your
Oh, yes, it
products or your
has.
messaging? Explain.
Yes. So the good news for us is organic requires a lot of but one of the things, so we've always, for example, listed all ingredients on our labels, but we haven't listed, if something is an allergen. So now there are more disclosure information that's necessary.
Yeah.
One of the things we've had to do now is to add contact information that we didn't have on our labels before. And I got to tell you, for a company that has as many products as we have, it's a price to pay. It's very expensive to replace labels and to update labels. But yes, those are two examples of some of the adjustments we have had and are in the process of making to labels to ensure that we are in fact being compliant.
But what a cost! I mean, that's not just an easy fix
No,
for you
sir.
guys. You have to change it up. Do you have a good supplier, or do you have someone? Tell us a little bit how easy it is or difficult it is to change a label.
Well, I mean, it is costly.
Yeah.
But one of the great things is we have suppliers that we've been working with for many years.
Yeah.
It's important. You learn this from an event like this. Suppliers are partners.
Yeah.
When you can establish a deep-rooted partnership with a supplier who understands who you are, what you need, when you need it, and how you need it, and understand the transitions you're making, and that can work with you along the way. So our approach, because let's be real, we have to be cost conscious.
Yeah.
We've had to take a measured, phased approach. We can't just replace all of our labels at once.
Right.
So we've literally have to be doing it through phases, and we're working with our partners to ensure that happens.
So do you have someone on your team that is looking at the specific regulatory, or do you outsource something like that? Or it's you. It's
I take on a lot of it, but one of the things I would suggest to everyone, we've consulted with people like, we've consulted an external third party that are experts in this space, because I got to tell you, there's a lot to dissect. There's a lot of information. We are not the experts. We're just required to comply. So I think one of the things that we have to be very careful of is to rely on the expertise of third-party organizations that are experts in this space to help provide guidance and directions to us.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of our saving grace.
Yeah, okay. I mean, we saw from Rick's presentation how precise the language is. I mean, you've got the lawyers all involved here as well.
Well, he knows. That's exactly it. So we actually have a regulatory legal partner that helps us to dot the I's, cross the T's to ensure that, because it is important. You don't want to expose yourself, and there's so many opportunities, Rick, for that exposure if you don't have a partner like that.
I figured you'd have someone or someone you can lean on for that sort of expertise.
Yes, sir.
So Rick talked a lot about adverse event reporting, and I kind of want to wrap with that. Tell me about how your adverse event reporting has changed, if at all, with MOCRA.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the toughest piece of this regulation. For us, what's helpful is we only use natural ingredients. Every ingredient we use is natural because we have to meet a very high threshold of organic certification, and then our other products also use organic ingredients even if they're not certified. But what we've had to do is to work with a third party to have a tracking system in place that when we haven't had any serious knock on wood. We haven't had any serious adverse events, but we've had adverse events that we've had to track and record and investigate, and to make sure we can substantiate. And as Rick took us through the process, we have to do our due diligence internally. When something comes up, we have to make sure we have the documentation. So I would say one of the greatest burden it's placed on us is to ensure that our procedures for documentation are processes are clear,
Yeah.
and then everything is tracked and documented, because God forbid something happens, we need to have the information to fall back on.
Yeah, and MOCRA sort of sets the framework for that, and I mean, it just sounds like quite a challenge. Love your insight. We're going to have to leave it there because of time. Claire Walters, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, sir.
It's a
really
pleasure. Thank
great
you.
information. Thank you all for being here. Happy Halloween, and we'll see you next time here on the Southern Stage. Thank you.